So, what if I told you that one of the most famous, religious texts in human history
Hmm.
isn't actually a religious text at all?
I mean, that is a pretty massive claim to start with.
Yeah, it sounds wild, but what if beneath all the centuries of traditional theology and uh, beneath all the assumptions about divine wrath and spiritual mysticism, what you're actually holding is an incredibly ruthless, mathematically precise survival manual for human civilization?
Yeah, and that is exactly the premise we're diving into today.
Exactly. Today, you and I are going straight into the heart of that idea.
Yeah.
We're looking at a deeply fascinating set of sources centered on a lecture. It was delivered in September 1979 by a thinker named Parwez.
Right.
And he took a specific sequence of ancient text, verses 40 through 47 of Surah Ar-Rum from the Quran, and he just completely stripped away the religious sentimentality.
He totally dismantled it.
Yeah. And our mission in this deep dive is to do exactly the same thing. We are throwing out the superstition. We aren't going to talk about lightning bolts or magical curses. Instead, we're going to sit down and analyze this text as, like, master sociologists.
Or ecologists or systems engineers.
Yes, we're dissecting a diagnostic framework for why human civilizations survive and why they inevitably, mathematically, collapse.
It is a complete paradigm shift. And honestly, if you're listening to this right now and you work in economics or supply chain management or political science, this framework is going to sound shockingly modern to you.
Oh, absolutely.
Because Parwez approached these verses not as a collection of mystical incantations, but as a set of immutable social and economic laws. He argued that to read this text as mere theology is to completely miss the actual structural mechanics being described.
Right. It's like, think of this text not as a theology of a wrathful deity sitting in the clouds, sending hurricanes to smite people who misbehave.
Yeah, that's the classic trope.
Right. Instead, think of it as the operating manual for a massively complex machine, the machine of human civilization. If you pour sand into the gears of a massive industrial machine, it breaks down, it grinds to a halt.
And the machine isn't angry at you?
Exactly. The gears don't have feelings, they don't have morality, it's just physics.
Yeah.
It's just cause and effect. And that is exactly how we need to frame our conversation today.
That is the crucial starting point. If you don't remove the emotion from the analysis, you just can't see the blueprint.
You're blinded by it.
Exactly. Parwez's entire 1979 lecture hinges on removing that superstition and looking exclusively at the structural reality of cause and effect. And he starts doing this by systematically exploding the myth of divine punishment, focusing really heavily on verse 41 of this text.
Okay, let's get right into verse 41 then. So the standard translation you'll usually find goes something like this. Corruption has appeared on land and sea because of what the hands of people have earned, so that he may let them taste part of what they have done. Perhaps they will return.
Right, that's the typical English rendering.
So if I'm just a casual reader, I look at that and immediately think of a cosmic judge. People sinned, they earned punishment, so God sent corruption, like a plague or a flood, to make them taste their punishment. That's the traditional reading, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. The tradition takes the Arabic word for corruption, which is fasad, and maps it directly onto personal moral sin.
Like lying or stealing.
Right. You lied, you cheated, you didn't perform the right rituals, so you have a moral stain. And because of that moral stain, some supernatural force magically conjured up a natural disaster to punish you. It reads fasad as a totally mystical concept.
But I'm assuming Parwez completely rejects that.
He fundamentally dismantles it. Parwez pivots sharply away from the mystical interpretation and provides a strictly structural reframing.
Okay.
In the context of this linguistic framework, facade does not mean a mystical moral stain. It means systemic dysfunction. It means structural imbalance.
So it's not a magical curse.
Not at all. It is the tangible material consequence of human systemic choices. It's the result of a society organizing its economy and its environment in a way that violates the physical and social laws of the universe.
Wait, hold on. I want to challenge that real quick because it's very easy to just say it means systemic dysfunction to make an ancient text sound cool and modern.
Sure.
How does he actually justify that leap? Is he just projecting 20th century systems theory backward onto a 7th century text?
It's a vital question, and he justifies it through the etymology of the word itself. The root of facade carries the meaning of something rotting, spoiling, or falling out of its proper balance.
Correct.
Think of milk spoiling, or an architectural beam rotting and compromising the weight distribution of a house. It isn't a magical state, it's a structural breakdown.
Ah, I see.
So when a society over-leverages its environment, when it pollutes its water sources, when it builds an economy based on taking more energy out of the system than it regenerates, the result is facade. It's a mathematical certainty.
So the disaster is just the outcome of the math.
Exactly. The ecological disaster, the drought, the famine, it isn't a magical punishment. It's the inevitable endpoint of a dysfunctional equation.
Wow.
You built a rotting beam into the house, and the roof collapsed. Gravity didn't punish you. Gravity just operated.
Okay, that makes total sense. So we're talking about tangible things. Over-extraction of natural resources. Poor macroeconomic management. The exploitation of labor to the point where the working class can't afford to live. That is the facade.
Precisely. And this fundamentally changes how we read the second half of that verse.
The part about letting them taste part of what they've done.
Yes. Traditionally, that's read as a judge sentencing a criminal. You did the crime, now you must taste the punishment. But in a systems engineering framework, what is that? It's a feedback loop.
Oh, a feedback loop.
Right.
Because every complex system has feedback mechanisms.
Well, exactly. If an economic system exploits its agricultural base to the point of total soil depletion, the resulting famine is the feedback loop. The system is returning the output of your input.
So you put an over-extraction, and the system outputs scarcity.
Right. It isn't a divine sentencing. It is the system violently pushing back.
So if you're listening to this and trying to visualize it, think of touching a hot stove. If I reach out and touch a glowing red burner, my hand gets burned.
Yep.
The burn isn't the universe punishing me for a moral failing. The universe isn't sitting there judging me for being careless with kitchen appliances. The burn is a vital, immediate feedback mechanism. It's data.
Yes, it's data.
It's telling my nervous system that my current action is structurally incompatible with my biology.
That is the exact biological analogy that makes this click. The pain is diagnostic. It's information. And that's what verse 41 is stating. The tasting of the consequence is crucial data being fed back into the society.
Basically saying, hey, this isn't working.
Right. The ecosystem or the economy is screaming, your current inputs are destroying the host. And notice how the verse ends, perhaps they will return.
Meaning perhaps they'll receive this data, realize their socio-economic system is completely incompatible with reality, and correct their course. Return to systemic alignment.
Yes. You don't fall to your knees and apologize to the stove. You take your hand off the burner. You change your relationship to the heat.
Wow. Yeah.
Parwez stresses in his lecture that weeping and pleading for the dysfunction to go away, praying for the famine to end or the economy to recover, while you continue the exact same extractive actions that caused the dysfunction, is absolute madness.
Because the system doesn't care about your tears.
Exactly. It only responds to the inputs.
That is a fascinating way to read it.
Yeah.
But let's get into the weeds here, because I want to know exactly what kind of dysfunction the text is talking about.
Sure, let's drill down.
The source material spends a massive amount of time on a linguistic deep dive of a very specific phrase in this verse. Facade, field bar, wall bar. Corruption on land and sea.
Right.
Now, to me, land and sea just sounds like a poetic ancient way of saying everywhere. It sounds like a weather forecast. We've got storms on land and storms on the sea. How does Parwez get a complex socioeconomic diagnosis out of that?
This is where Parwez's linguistic extraction is just brilliant, and where you realize how specific this diagnostic tool really is. He argues that reading land and sea as a simple weather report ignores the deep sociological roots of the Arabic language.
Okay, how so?
Let's take the word bar. In common translation, yes, it means the literal ocean, the sea. But if you trace it back to its root meaning, it means to spread, to expand, or to cultivate broadly.
Okay, so how does spreading broadly map onto an economic system?
Well, in the sociological context of ancient and classical Arabic, the ocean wasn't just a body of water, it was the ultimate medium of trade, connection, and expansion.
Right, it's how you moved goods.
Exactly. So the concept of bar refers to settled, urbanized, widely expanded civilization. It refers to the centers of commerce, the bustling trade hubs, the expanded networks of human economic activity, the metropolis. That is the bar.
Okay, I follow that. So if the bar is the urban trade center, what is the bar? The land.
Bar refers to the open, uncultivated expanses, the nomadic domains, the rural areas, the places of primary resource extraction, the forests, the mines, the agricultural peripheries.
The places where stuff actually comes from.
Right. It is the raw earth from which civilization draws its initial material.
Wow. Okay, so if you put that together, when the text says there is facade systemic collapse in the bar, it isn't just saying things are bad everywhere.
No.
It's describing the entire economic pipeline.
It is a profound macroeconomic diagnosis. Facade happens across the entire supply chain, and it's sequential.
Sequential, what do you mean?
Well, in the bar, the rural domains, this dysfunction looks like deforestation, massive soil salinization, the exhaustion of raw minerals, the exploitation of the rural working class or agricultural labor. It's the point of raw extraction.
And then, obviously, that dysfunction doesn't just stay in the rural areas, it travels up the pipeline.
It has to travel. Because the urban centers, the bar, rely entirely on the extraction from the bar. The city cannot feed itself. It relies on the rural periphery.
Right.
So the corruption, the facade, spreads to the settled civilization. And how does it manifest there? Not as crop failure, but as trade route disruption, massive wealth inequality, labor exploitation in the factories or merchant houses, financial speculation that produces absolutely nothing of real material value.
So we aren't just talking about a localized drought.
Mm.
If you're listening to this and you study supply chain logistics, this is describing a total systemic supply chain failure.
Exactly.
Because if the rural extraction, the bar, is operating in an unsustainable way, like if they're strip mining the soil just to meet urban quotas, the urban consumer center, the bar, ultimately starves and collapses.
They are completely inextricably linked in this systemic failure. You can't have a thriving urban financial center if the rural agricultural base has turned to dust.
Wow. If you look at this text as a diagnostic tool, it's telling you that civilizational collapse isn't random and it doesn't happen all at once.
Right, it starts at the edges.
Yeah. It starts at the peripheries, at the point of extraction. It starts where the raw materials meet the labor, and then it rots its way inward to the highly complex centers of commerce. This verse is a diagnosis of an extractive economy operating past its regenerative capacity.
It's an ecological and economic early warning system.
But this raises a massive question. If this is the blueprint of how the machine breaks down, why does it break down? What is the actual mechanism? Why do humans consistently build economies that destroy their own bar?
And that brings us to the absolute core of the 1979 lecture. Parwez asks that exact question. How is this facade, this corruption, actually generated? What is the engine driving the train off the cliff?
Right, who's behind the wheel?
Exactly. And he identifies the mechanism by exploring two entirely opposing economic concepts that are foundational to the broader text, riba and zakat.
Okay, let's really take our time here, because this is where the source completely dismantles standard everyday assumptions. If you know anything about these terms, you probably think you already know what they mean.
You probably do.
Let's start with riba, which we can call the engine of exploitation. Usually when people hear riba, they translate it simply as usury or interest. They think it's a narrow debate about banking fees or whether a loan should have simple versus compound interest.
Right, and Parwez argues that reducing riba to a technical debate over banking interest rates is entirely missing the forest for the trees. It is much, much deeper than a line item on a loan document.
So what is it?
Riba represents a fundamental foundational systemic flaw. It is an entire economic paradigm where wealth increases without the input of labor.
Let me stop you right there. Wealth without work.
Yes.
Because if I save my money for 20 years and I invest it in, say, a community housing project, and I get a return on that investment to fund my retirement, Parwez is saying I'm generating systemic corruption just because I got a return on my investment. Isn't he just projecting modern socialist theory onto ancient text? How does he defend that?
It's the perfect pushback. And Parwez addresses this by focusing on the scale and the power dynamic of the system, not just the individual retiree. He defines riba through the concept of the sleeping partner. This is the person or the massive institutional entity that contributes capital, does absolutely no physical, mental, or intellectual labor in the actual enterprise, and yet extracts the surplus value created by the people who actually do the grueling work.
I see the distinction.
Parwez states that when a society designs its entire system to allow wealth to grow simply by virtue of existing capital, compounding capital autonomously, it mathematically leads to the hoarding of national wealth by a microscopic fraction of the population.
Because the math is inescapable. If capital grows faster than economic output, the people holding the capital eventually own everything.
Exactly. It leads to the systematic starvation and subjugation of the working class. Because the people actually doing the labor in the bar, actually mining the lithium, growing the food, building the infrastructure, they're seeing the value of their labor extracted and funneled upward to entities that are just sitting on capital in the bar.
So riba isn't just interest. It is the systemic design of extraction. It is the mechanism that creates the facade. It's the engine that forces the farmers to over-extract the soil because they have to pay the sleeping partners in the city.
Precisely. Riba is the ultimate extractive engine. And the source contrasts this directly with zakat, which we can call the engine of nourishment.
Okay, let's unpack zakat.
And just like with riba, the source demands that we completely eradicate our traditional, comfortable definition of the word.
Right, because usually zakat is defined as a 2.5% charitable tax. You calculate your unused wealth at the end of the year, you give a tiny fraction of it to the poor, and you've done your duty. You're a good person.
Parwez is incredibly aggressive in dismantling that idea. He considers that interpretation not just wrong, but actively harmful. He argues that zakat is not a personal, voluntary charity. It is a systemic, structural obligation of the state itself.
But again, I have to play devil's advocate here. How does he get from a word that everyone else translates as charity to systemic state obligation?
Yeah.
What linguistic evidence?
He goes back to the absolute root of the Arabic word, ZKW. The root meaning has nothing to do with charity or giving away money. The root meaning is growth, nourishment, purification, and development.
Okay.
Think of a plant growing to its full, healthy potential. Therefore, he defines zakat systemically. It is the absolute obligation of the socio-economic system to provide the means of nourishment and development, what he calls nashonuma, to every single individual in that society.
And the lecturer makes it very clear that nourishment isn't just handing out government cheese or stale bread so people don't literally drop dead in the streets.
Far from it. That's mere survival. Zakat is the provision of physical, mental, and intellectual development. The baseline of the system must guarantee that no human being is subjugated by the sheer panic of survival.
Because if you are constantly terrified about where your next meal is coming from or how you'll pay for your child's medical care or if you'll be evicted next month, you cannot develop your intellectual or human potential. You are trapped in fight or flight mode.
Exactly. The system of zakat is structurally designed to remove that baseline terror so human potential can actually flourish. Parwez argues that a society has not established zakat until every citizen has access to the resources they need to develop their maximum potential.
I love how stark the contrast is.
Yeah.
If you're looking at this as a systems engineer, you have two blueprints.
Right.
Blueprint A is riba, a system where the few extract from the many, creating panic, scarcity, and ecological collapse. Blueprint B is zakat, a system where the structure itself guarantees the baseline of dignity and development for everyone, preventing anyone from being exploited just to survive.
And Parwez uses a brilliantly biting, unforgettable analogy in the lecture to show how utterly incompatible these two engines are. He talks about the dead dog in the well.
Oh, this part is wild.
Yeah.
Let's unpack the dead dog, because this really highlights the absurdity of modern philanthropy as a substitute for systemic justice.
So imagine you have a community well. It's the only source of water for the village.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, a dog has fallen into the well and died. The corpse is rotting at the bottom. The water is corrupt. It's toxic. Now, the traditional superficial approach to purifying this well, which represents an economy running entirely on the extractive principles of riba, is to say, well, the texts say we need to give some water to the poor to purify our wealth. So if we just pull out 50 buckets of water and give it away as charity, the rest of the well will be mathematically purified.
Meaning you run a totally ruthless, exploitative business empire all year. You hoard wealth, you crush your labor unions, you pollute the local river, you dodge taxes, but then at the end of the year, you write a check for 2.5% of your profits to a charity.
All right, you do a photo op.
Yeah. You get a tax write-off, you go to a gala, and magically, the rest of your wealth is considered purified and morally acceptable.
Exactly. And the source mocks this relentlessly. Parwez points out the glaring idiocy of this approach. You can pull 100 buckets of water out of that well. You can pull 1,000 buckets. You can give water to orphans all day long. Right. But as long as the rotting corpse of the dog remains at the bottom of the well, every single drop of water in that well is still toxic.
Wow.
The dead dog is the structural system of riba.
So his point is that you cannot purify an inherently corrupt, extractive economic system by skimming a Tiny percentage off the top for charity, the rot remains in the system itself.
Yes, the charity model is essentially a coping mechanism for a broken system. Parwez is arguing for a system that doesn't require massive charity networks because it doesn't structurally manufacture poverty in the first place. You don't pull buckets out of the well. You have to climb down and pull the dog out of the well.
You have to change the actual engine of the economy.
Exactly.
There is a biological analogy provided in the text that contrasts perfectly with the dead dog in the well, and it shows what a non-extractive system actually looks like in practice. The source compares the ideal system of provision to the ultimate natural system, a mother's womb or a mother's milk.
That's right.
He asks us to compare our human hoarding, this riba, to how nature actually provisions life.
It's a beautiful and highly technical observation. The lecture goes into incredible detail on the biological precision of this.
It notes how breast milk is astonishingly calibrated to the exact real-time needs of the infant. When a baby is first born, its digestive system is incredibly weak. It can't process heavy nutrients or complex fats.
Right.
So the milk that the mother's body produces in those first few days is mostly water, like 95% water, with just a tiny fraction of nutrients.
It is exactly what the infant system can handle. Nothing more, nothing less.
Right. And then, as the child grows over the weeks and months, as its digestive engine gets stronger and needs more fuel to build muscle and brain tissue, the structural composition of the milk literally changes.
It adapts.
It naturally becomes denser, richer, packed with more complex fats and proteins. Nature provides exactly what is needed, exactly when it's needed, in the exact proportion required for optimal growth. It doesn't hoard the nutrients in the mother's body while the baby starves.
And it doesn't charge the baby interest.
Exactly. Our extractive human economic systems do the exact opposite of this biological perfection. We hoard the nutrients, the capital, the resources at the top, while the vulnerable parts of the society starve.
And that biological precision is the essence of zakat, as Parwez defines it. It is an economy mimicking that natural frictionless provision.
Mimicking nature.
Right. The state, the socio-economic system, providing the exact means of nourishment required for the development of its citizens at the right time without exploitation. When an economy ignores this natural law of provision and shifts to hoarding, it triggers that systemic dysfunction, the facade we talked about in verse 41.
Which perfectly sets up the next crucial point in Parwez's analysis. Because if you're listening to this, you might be thinking, well, this all sounds like a nice utopian theory, but where is the proof?
Right. Show me the data.
Exactly. Parwez demands proof as well. This brings us to what we can call the engine of reason, focusing on verse 42. And the translation says, travel in the land and see what was the end of those who came before.
This is one of the most vital pivots in the entire analysis. Because again, traditionally, this verse is read as a call for a kind of melancholic spiritual tourism.
Spiritual tourism.
Yeah, go look at some old ruins, look at a broken pyramid or a crumbled temple, and feel sad about the fleeting nature of life. Or worse, look at the ruins and tremble at how angry God was at those people. Look what God did to them, you better behave.
But in the systems engineering framework Parwez is using, this is not a call for spiritual tourism. It is a strict empirical instruction. It is the scientific method applied to history.
Exactly. Parwez is essentially telling the listener, do not speculate about invisible forces. Do not sit around in your philosophical circles debating unproven assertions about divine wrath or mystical punishments.
Yeah, get out of your armchair.
Right. Get up, go out into the field, and read the data set. The archaeological and historical records are hard data.
The ruins of dead civilizations are the spreadsheets of history.
Yes. The cause and effect of systemic collapse is recorded in the soil, in the architecture, in the trade records of those dead empires. The instruction, travel in the land, is an instruction to be empirical.
So Parwez is essentially arguing that this text is asking us to act as forensic accountants of dead empires.
Where?
We need to act as ecologists and sociologists.
Let's really map this out with an example, because this is where the theory hits the dirt.
Okay, let's do it.
Instead of looking at a ruined city, let's say ancient Mesopotamia, and saying the gods must have been angry because they didn't perform the right rituals, we are supposed to look at the material reality. Mesopotamia collapsed largely because of soil salinization. They over-irrigated the land to grow massive amounts of surplus wheat to fund the urban elites, the bar.
And what happened?
The water evaporated, left the salt behind, and ruined the soil. The bar collapsed.
Exactly. When you travel in the land and examine the ruins empirically, you find the exact same pattern every single time, whether it's Mesopotamia, the Mayans, or the Roman Empire.
The math always catches up.
Always. You find that their version of riba, their extractive machinery, ultimately outpaced their zakat, their regenerative nourishment. They took more out of the rural environment than the environment could replenish. They hoarded the wealth in the urban centers, leaving the working class destitute.
The dog was in the well, and they just kept drinking the toxic water while telling themselves the economy was booming.
And eventually, the well ran dry, or the toxicity killed the society. The historical record proves that systemic collapse is a structural failure, not a magical curse.
Right.
Every collapsed civilization is an empirical data point, proving that you cannot violate the laws of socio-economic balance without destroying yourself.
Okay, but let's push back on the timeline of all this. Because systems don't usually just evaporate overnight, right?
Right.
Rome didn't fall on a Tuesday. Mesopotamia didn't turn into a desert in one afternoon. If this text is a true diagnostic manual, it should account for the mechanics of how a system fails. It shouldn't just be a sudden cliff you fall off without warning.
And it absolutely accounts for that.
Yeah.
The lecture points out that destruction is a process. Before a total civilizational collapse, the system provides warnings. It generates initial shocks. These shocks are meant to induce return to systemic alignment.
Oh, this goes back to what we talked about in the very beginning with verse 41, the tasting of the consequences, the feedback loop.
Yes. When a society is misaligned, when its engine is running entirely on riba, they will experience early crises. These could be severe economic depressions, localized ecological disasters, massive social unrest, supply chain breakdowns.
Like an engine sputtering, smoking, and losing power before it completely seizes up and throws a rod.
Precisely. And Parwes analyzes the psychological and societal reaction to these early crises.
Yeah.
The crucial test for a civilization is how it responds to the shock.
That makes sense.
If a society looks at a massive economic depression or a terrifying ecological disaster and says, we need to fundamentally change our extractive system, we need to remove the riba and implement zakat, then they can correct course. They can listen to the feedback loop and return to balance.
But if they ignore the warning...
If they ignore the feedback loop, if they just try to patch the engine without fixing the fundamental flaw, they accelerate toward the final inescapable collapse. They hit the point of no return.
The source uses two incredibly powerful analogies here to illustrate this momentum toward disaster and how human beings delude themselves into ignoring the feedback.
Oh, the train analogy.
Right. First, there's the train analogy. Imagine a train that has jumped onto the wrong track. A track heading straight toward a cliff. Now, the society inside the train thinks that because the train is moving, because there is progress and speed, everything is fine.
Right, they're looking out the window saying, look how fast we're going.
Exactly. The economy is growing, the GDP is up. But the lecture points out a terrifying reality. Once you are on the wrong track, the faster you go, the further you get from your actual destination and the closer you get to the cliff.
Wow. Economic growth on a fundamentally corrupt foundation isn't progress, it's just accelerating your own destruction.
Exactly.
If your economy is based on extracting finite resources, optimizing that extraction with better technology just means you hit the wall faster.
Yeah.
You aren't saving the society, you are just increasing the velocity of the crash.
Yes. Efficiency in a broken system just makes the system break faster. And that leads to the second analogy Parwes uses, which deals with how societies often try to fix their problems without actually changing the system. This is the analogy of the carpenter.
I really want to dig into this carpenter analogy because it hits so close to home for modern politics and modern religion. The source describes a carpenter who is hired by someone to build a door for a house.
Okay.
The carpenter shows up, opens his toolbox, takes out his chisels, his planes, his saws, and he spends the entire day perfectly sharpening his tools. He oils them, he hones the blades, he makes them gleam in the sun. He's completely dedicated to his tools.
Right.
But the sun goes down, and he has never actually touched a piece of wood. He hasn't built the door.
And when he asks for his wages at the end of the day, the homeowner looks at him and says, "You didn't build the door." And the carpenter's defense is, "But look how incredibly sharp my tools are."
That is, it is such a devastating critique because what Parwes is saying is that all of our rituals, our prayers, our empty policy debates, our political grandstanding, they are just the sharpening of the tools. They are utterly useless if you don't actually build the door.
And what, in this context, is the door?
The door is the actual, tangible, socio-economic system that guarantees human dignity. The door is zakat. You can't pray away a structural collapse while actively ignoring the structural design.
Right.
You can have the most beautiful, elaborate religious rituals in the world. You can have endless parliamentary debates where everyone wears suits and sounds incredibly smart discussing marginal tax rates.
Yeah.
You can sharpen the tools until they're razor thin. But if the wealth is still hoarding at the top, if the environment is still being strip-mined, if the working class is still terrified of starvation, you haven't built the door.
The tools are supposed to be a means to an end. The rituals, the debates, they are supposed to prepare the human mind and spirit to do the actual hard work of building a just society.
Exactly.
If they become an end unto themselves, if you think sharpening the tools is the work, you are just a carpenter playing with chisels while the house has no doors. And the storm is coming.
That leads us perfectly into the climax of this analysis, which focuses on verse 47. This is the culmination of the blueprint. We're talking about the law of requital.
Right, the final piece.
The verse culminates with this statement. And it was a right upon us to help the believers. In Arabic, وَكَانَ حَقًّا عَلَيْنَا نَصْرُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ.
This is where Parwez delivers the ultimate destruction of religious sentimentality.
Okay, let's break this down carefully, because on the surface, help the believers sounds like the ultimate religious promise. It sounds like the exact opposite of what we've been discussing.
It really does.
It sounds like if you join our club and believe our specific dogma and perform our specific rituals, a supernatural force will swoop in, defeat your enemies, and save your economy.
Exactly. That is the conventional reading, and it has been the conventional reading for centuries. But Parwez frames this entirely differently. He refuses to read it as theology. He frames this as a strict law statement. It is a design specification of the universe.
The law of requital, mukafat e amal, cause and effect. The universe responds to what you actually do, not what you claim to believe.
Yes. But to understand this, we first have to redefine the word believers, the mu'minin. In this systems engineering context, Parwez argues that a believer is not someone who merely holds a theological opinion in their head or performs a daily ritual.
Okay, so what is a believer in this context?
A mu'min is someone who actively aligns their society with the productive, non-exploitative, regenerative order we've been discussing. They are the builders of the door. They are the ones implementing zakat and eradicating riba.
They are the ones actually operating the machinery according to the manual.
Exactly. And if you operate the machinery of civilization according to its proper socio-economic parameters, the system will inherently sustain and elevate you. It runs smoothly. It is frictionless. That structural frictionless state is the help mentioned in the verse.
So the help is not a supernatural miracle. It's not a magical hand coming out of the clouds to crush your competitors or fill your treasury with gold.
No. Parwez argues that the help is the compound output of right principles. Let's think about it logically. If your society guarantees basic needs, which is zakat, if it prevents wealth hoarding, which is riba, if it maintains ecological balance, which prevents facade filbar, you will naturally have a stronger, more resilient, more unified civilization.
Because everyone is taken care of.
Right. Your citizens will be educated, healthy, and fiercely loyal to the system because the system nourishes them. Your society will be virtually unbreakable from the inside. That structural advantage is the help.
Well, it's just math again.
Exactly. It is mathematically guaranteed by the laws of cause and effect. It is a right upon us because the universe is physically and socially designed to support systems that align with its laws of balance.
But is it really that mechanical? I mean, humans are messy. How does this kind of absolute systemic alignment actually look in the real world?
Good question.
The source brings in a stunning historical example to illustrate what this alignment looks like in practice, and it involves the leadership at the very top. It's the example of Abu Bakr, the first head of state after the Prophet.
This is a perfect demonstration of aligning the system at the very top, and it shows why the system only works if the elites are subject to the same feedback loops as the working class.
Right. So when Abu Bakr took office as the head of state, he had to step down from his private business because governing the civilization was a full-time job. He needed a salary from the state treasury to survive.
Makes sense.
So a council gathered to determine what the salary of the most powerful man in the civilization should be. And Abu Bakr sets the standard. He doesn't ask for a percentage of the treasury. He asks the council, what is the exact daily wage of the lowest laborer in the city?
Wow.
They calculate it and tell him the amount. And Abu Bakr says, that will be my salary.
And the immediate pushback from the council is exactly what you would expect today. They say, but you can't possibly live on that. It's barely enough to survive. You are the head of state. You have foreign dignitaries to meet. You need a larger allowance.
And Abu Bakr's response is the crux of the entire system of zakat. He says, if the wage isn't enough to live on, the solution is not to raise my own salary from the treasury. The solution is to raise the systemic baseline for the laborer.
That is just breathtaking. If you are a CEO listening to this or a politician, think about the implications of that statement.
It is breathtaking.
Yeah.
Because he legally bound his own biological survival to the survival of the most vulnerable person in the society. If the head of state is hungry, if he can't feed his family on that wage, he has the ultimate power to fix the economy.
Right.
But he can't fix it just for himself. He has to fix the structure for everyone.
That is what Parwez means by aligning with the system. That is zakat in action. It is eradicating riba at the highest level of power. It guarantees that the decision makers feel the exact same systemic feedback as the citizens. There is no insulation for the elites. If the well is toxic, the king drinks toxic water.
And this brings us to a moment of brilliant, dark humor in the source text regarding those who ignore this law. The lecture essentially mocks the idea of societies that operate completely corrupt, exploitative, ruthless economies, but still expect divine rescue.
Yeah, the cognitive dissonance is wild.
Parvez talks about societies where the economy is completely extractive, where the elites hoard everything, and then when the inevitable economic shocks or natural disasters come, millions of people gather in fields or mosques for 30 years, crying and praying for magical victory or an economic rescue.
Parwez's frustration in the 1979 lecture is palpable there. He sees people begging the sky for rescue while they are actively, manually running the engine of their own destruction.
It's like begging the laws of aerodynamics to let you fly while you're actively standing on the tarmac with a wrench, dismantling the airplane's wings.
Exactly.
You can cry, you can pray, you can perform rituals all you want, but if you take the wings off the plane, gravity's going to win. The law of aerodynamics doesn't care about your prayers. It cares about the structural integrity of the wings.
And that is the ultimate lesson of the law of requital. The universe responds to actions, to structures, to systems. It does not respond to empty sentimentality. If you build a society based on extraction and exploitation, the law of cause and effect guarantees your collapse. If you build a society based on nourishment and equity, the law of cause and effect guarantees your endurance.
So as we bring this deep dive to a close, let's synthesize exactly what we've unpacked today. We've taken an incredibly dense ancient text and viewed it through a highly modern, analytical, socio-economic lens provided by Parwez. And what we've found is a diagnostic framework defined by two things: permanence and change.
That's the perfect synthesis. The permanent principle, the immutable law of the universe, is that facade, systemic corruption through extraction, wealth hoarding, and socioeconomic misalignment will always inevitably generate its own corrective feedback.
And if you ignore it?
And if that feedback is ignored, it culminates in ecological and civilizational collapse. That is the permanent law. It applied to Babylon, it applied to Rome, and it applies to us.
What changes over time is merely the specific form of the extraction. The technology changes, but the math remains exactly the same.
Exactly. In antiquity, the extraction, the facade fill bar, might have looked like slash-and-burn agriculture, or over-irrigating the desert, or literally enslaving conquered peoples to mine salt.
Right.
The hoarding in the bar might have been gold locked in a physical vault by a pharaoh. Today, the extraction looks vastly different, but structurally, it's identical.
Today, it looks like industrial pollution. It looks like microplastics saturating the ocean. It looks like high-frequency financial speculation, where algorithms trade billions of dollars in milliseconds without producing a single tangible good for human nourishment.
Pure riba.
Yes. It looks like a global gig economy, where workers create massive value for tech platforms, but don't have basic health care or living wage.
The technology is digital, but the structural dynamic is absolutely identical to the ancient empires. The engine of exploitation is still running, the dog is still rotting in the well, and the feedback loop is still operating exactly as the diagnostic manual described thousands of years ago.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you to ponder today. We've spent this entire deep dive talking about historical ruins, ancient empires, and theoretical systems. But if verses 40 to 47 of this text are truly a diagnostic framework for civilizational health, you don't need to look at dead empires in Mesopotamia. Just look out your window. Look around at our world today.
We are entirely surrounded by the data. The feedback loop is currently screaming at us.
We are experiencing unprecedented ecological feedback. Wildfires that turn the sky orange, superstorms, collapsing biodiversity, rising oceans. We are seeing massive historic economic inequality, where a handful of individuals hold more wealth than the bottom half of humanity combined.
The data's all there.
According to the blueprint we just decoded, the system is actively sending us shocks. We are tasting the consequences of our extractive design. The machine is rattling, the train is accelerating on the wrong track.
Heading for the cliff.
Exactly. The universe is telling us, perhaps they will return. The final question for you is, are we going to finally stop, look at the blueprint, and actually build a sustainable door? Or are we just going to keep sitting in the corner, perfectly sharpening our tools, debating policy, and performing our rituals while the house burns down around us?